a book that invites questions. So that one of my favorite questions is, you remember the story of Joseph and his brothers. And when we read it and re-experience it, we say, why didn't Joseph just, when he was number 2 man in Egypt, send a messenger home to his dad and say, Dad, I'm still alive, it's me? Why did he have to go through the process with his brothers? There are a whole set of questions that this kind of a text asks because of the kind of text that is, because of the kind of book that it is. I'll give you some more examples. Let's look at Don Pagis's poem, item 6 on your handout. I'll read it for you first in Hebrew. כאן במשלוח הזה אני חווה עם הבל בני, אם תראו את בני הגדול, קין בן אדם, תגידו לו שאני. Here in the carload I am Eve, with Abel my son. If you see my other son, Cain, son of man, tell him that I... Pagis's poem takes us from the historical evidence of the Holocaust, in its title and first line, into murder. Here that murder is seen through the lens of the biblical account of the first murder. In Pagis's poem, Eve speaks to the reader. Perhaps she is a bystander, the reader, to this experience. Ani Chava, I am Eve, she says, asking the reader to tell her other son. Eve's request is not articulated into words. How can it be? Yet it is expressed in the silence with which the poem concludes. The translation by Stephen Mitchell honors the Hebrew original. The last line of the poem has no punctuation. Eve, the speaker, just stops. Many of you have read, for example, the Diary of Anne Frank. Well, there are many other diaries that are not so well known from the Holocaust. But like the Diary of Anne Frank, they just stop. Here, Pagis's poem speaks for all of those. The stop invokes the silence that carries us into a confrontation with murder. Let this poem, a very great poem, did I say you had to memorize it before you left the room? It's not hard. It's short, but boy, is it strong. Let Pagis's poem stand for Holocaust writing. The scribbled notes, the scratch fragments, the diaries, the memoirs, the poems, the essays, the stories. That as they engage the central questions of the Nazi genocide of the Jews, were also to change the post-war literary and cultural landscape. In Pagis's poem, we become Eve. We don't just read about her. We are not only the listener experiencing the trauma through its telling, but our presence is inscribed in the poem with the speaker. In Pagis's poem, silence speaks of mass murder, but also of possibility. The poem evokes a symbolic realm, what Weiss Halivni called the sense of mission. The result is to make the inscription in the sealed railway car, the poem, a portal that takes us into the classic Jewish practices of reading. Everyone in the room who is under 30 knows about portals because you've all devoured Harry Potter. The others, they have much to learn. Pagis's account does not end with murder. There is a next chapter. The survivor, Pagis, Weiss Halivni, Uncle Emmanuel, you, me, reads the historical record. But that does not mean that we leave that record, the inscription in pencil in the sealed railway car, nor the blettel stained with the grease of the sandwich. We do not leave it as a historical document to be shut up in a historical archive. Rather, it is, as it were, a message in a bottle, intended for us. Oh, the young ones don't know about messages in bottles, right? Just we old people know about that. As we read and reread Pagis's poem, Eve's message shifts from a bit of historical evidence to a personal call. Now it is part of a communal and defining narrative, a Hebrew letter that partakes of the power of the Hebrew alphabet in which God created the universe. In the darkness, this message, written, as Pagis's title says, written in pencil in the sealed railway carriage, becomes a point of light. As such, it propels the reader into the parallel universe of Jewish learning. Like Dan Pagis's poem, the blettel is a portal into that world, and that practice of study and reading, what Jews call learning. The meanings and feelings generated by the blettel for Weiss Halivni and his fellow inmates are complicated. He invokes their complexity. He insists that in the process of reading and studying, seeing and even holding the blettel, these slave laborers become in its presence free men, because only free men and women study Torah. Perhaps that was the experience of my uncle as well. Reciting Tehillim of Psalms gave him a way of entering a communal tradition that has historically defined the Jews and even their mission in civilization. Defining himself as a Jew by invoking his scriptural identity was not also my uncle Emmanuel resisting the Nazi effort to demolish his existence as a human being. That was then. This is now. I think we are required to resist these efforts now. Against these efforts, we have days like this one, commemorating Kristallnacht. What Weiss Halivni's memoir, Uncle Emmanuel's experience, Dan Pagis's poem underline, is how Judaism's habit of learning helped individual Jews continue to be human beings in an environment dedicated to inhumanity. Make no mistake of the importance of learning. Alon Confino's reframing of Kristallnacht helps us trace how Kristallnacht was the moment when the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, was burned throughout Nazi Germany, not just destroying Jewish businesses, humiliating, beating up and killing Jews, but destroying the Hebrew Bible, that is, killing Jews and Judaism. That was their purpose. In asking about their motive, Confino, who teaches history at the University of Virginia, Confino elaborates how the Nazis were trying to destroy the past of Germany and Western culture, that with the Renaissance had brought to consciousness the twin sources of Western cultural heritage in its Greek and Jewish origins. Confino also points to the ways in which, in the years before Nazism, and here is where learning is so important, German theologians had pursued the removal of the Old Testament from the Christian Bible and had systematically de-Judaized it, leading to a best-selling New Bible, with no Jewish elements in it. Well, I could talk more. But in conclusion, look at item 7 on your handout. I'm sorry, I know some of you anticipated that this would be a chance for you to rest and nap, but it's pretty short, really. Item 7, the destruction of Jews and Judaism was to be for the Nazis the creation of a new Aryan world, right? Which that Nazi guard thought my sister would be part of, blonde and blue-eyed. Against that idea, we have Primo Levi's injunction, which is the epigraph to Survival in Auschwitz, that book you should all read. I'll come back and teach it to you, don't worry. Quote, "You who live safe in your warm houses, you who find returning in the evening hot food and friendly faces, consider if this is a man, si questo è un uomo, a man who works in the mud, who does not know peace, who fights for a scrap of bread, who dies because of a yes or a no. Consider if this is a woman without hair and without name, with no more strength to remember, her eyes empty, her womb cold like a frog in winter. Meditate that this came about. I commend these words to you. Carve them in your hearts. At home, in the street, going to bed, rising. Repeat them to your children.